Hey, good morning.
All right, well, welcome to the November 10th California Water Quality Council Monitoring Council meeting. This will be the last meeting of 2021. I hope everyone is doing well. Before we get started, I'd like to do a land, territory, and water acknowledgement. I put up the slide, hopefully everybody can see my slide. And before we dive into today's agenda, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the tribal lands in California. The California Environmental Protection Agency and Natural Resources Agency are located in Sacramento. Sacramento was and still is a gathering place for many local tribes who have lived throughout the Central Valley and the foothills for generations and were the original stewards of this land. These people include the Nishinan, Maidu, and Miwok peoples, and the Putwin and Wintu nations who have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It's important for us to recognize that our organization sits on the tribal lands of Indigenous people and that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In acknowledging and remembering these communities and all the work we do, we hope to honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. There's some more information here on the slide, and I encourage you all to take a look at the link there to determine what land you all sit on. It's obviously varies throughout California and all of the United States. This sort of acknowledgement is something that I have been privileged to learn about and start utilizing in the meetings that we conduct as part of an attempt to advance racial equity and recognize the sacrifices of the original peoples throughout California. I'd like to make this a common thing across the council meetings for the future. We've been doing it in several different work groups, and I thought I'd utilize it here. With that, I'll turn it over to our co-chair, Karen Mogus.
Good morning. Thanks for that, Nick. This is actually the first meeting I've attended that acknowledged tribal lands that we are convening on, and so appreciate that acknowledgement and definitely support it for our council meetings moving forward. So just a little housekeeping. You probably saw the note pop up if you were on when the recording started, but this meeting is being recorded. So if you are not speaking, please make sure you're muted when you're not speaking. But if you would very much appreciate you turning your camera on so we can see you. We do have some new council members that we'll be talking about and welcoming later in the agenda, and want them to be able to start putting faces to names, even though we continue to meet remotely. We'll go over some introductions and review the agenda and action items. I think, is this where we're actually doing those things, or are we just going over what we're going to do?
So we'll do a quick round of introductions for council members. Anyone that's a non-council member, please go ahead and utilize the chat function to list your name and your affiliation or agency that you're working for. And if you're a member of the public, that's an affiliation. So go ahead and put that in if that's who you are. But I will go ahead and go through a roll call, and then I'll bring up the agenda, and if we can present it and see what people want to do. So,
okay, should I start by introducing myself?
Please.
Okay, I should have done that before. I'm Karen Mogus. I'm the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Board, but in my position as at the council, I am the co-chair representing Cal EPA.
Mark Gold is our co-chair. He had a conflict come up, but he will be joining us later in the meeting. He works for he's the executive director for the Ocean Protection Council and works for the Natural Resources Agency. I'm representing them on the council. Likewise, we know that Andrew Altavote, the representative for drinking water could not make it this morning, but will hopefully jump on later in the afternoon. Excuse me. With that, the next person would be the regulated community. Well, it's going to be awkward because we're introducing some new people. I'll skip the new people at first, and then we'll introduce them later. But so I'll skip those categories. How about regulated community stormwater?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Grant Sharp with Orange County Public Works, representing the regulated stormwater community on the council.
Thanks, Grant.
And hi, I'm Brian Lawrenson from Larry Walker Associates. I'm the alternate representing Casco in the stormwater community.
Good morning, Brian. Next up, agriculture.
Hello, I'm Mark Cady at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and I run the Fertilizer Research and Education Program, and I am the alternate for our department.
Thanks, Mark. The community monitoring groups.
Hey everyone, I'm Helen Fatanides and newly with Sierra Streams Institute, and yeah, I'm representing community monitoring groups for the council.
Thanks, Helen. Welcome back. Hope the little one's doing well. Public, Ray Heimstra. Okay, Ray is not here. Scientific.
I'm here. Just
here.
I was muted trying to find it. So good morning, everybody. Ray Heimstra. I'm the Associate Director at Orange County Coastkeeper, and I'm coming to you from the Orange County, the ancestral lands of the Tongva and Hashiman people, and I represent the public.
Thanks, Ray. And scientific community, non-academic.
Hi, Steve Weisberg from the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project Authority, representing the scientific community.
Morning, Steve. And water supply.
Good morning, everybody. This is Peter Vroom. I'm Deputy Director, San Diego Public Utilities, representing the water supply.
Thanks, Peter. US EPA, Terry, are you there?
Yep, this is Terry Fleming from EPA Region 9. I'm a liaison to the Water Quality Council.
Thanks, Terry. That should round it up. And we'll introduce the new seats and the new members in the next item. But we definitely have a quorum and a great attendance today. Let me bring up the agenda. Okay, hopefully you can see the agenda. Do you see the agenda? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay, great. Normally Karen would go through this, but I can go ahead and quickly do it since I'm not hearing anybody.
I can do it if you want.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, I can't see anything.
That's
like
okay.
Driving
That's okay.
blind.
I was just waiting for it to come up. So we've almost finished up with item 1. We'll round it out with looking at the action items from our August meeting. Then we'll move on to public forum. Anyone that is attending from the public would like to make any comments on items that are not already on the agenda can do so. Then we'll move on to item 3 to introduce our new interim council members. Really excited to have 3 new council members on board and hoping to get them confirmed by the agency secretaries in the not too distant future. Then we'll move on to announcements and updates from the council members. After that, we'll get an update from our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Working Group. And we'll round out our morning before our break with a discussion of the first proposed monitoring council resolution to recognize the utilities that voluntarily participated in the wastewater monitoring for COVID-19. And we'll discuss both adopting the resolution as well as the process for future resolutions by the council. We'll take a little break, and then the rest of the meeting will start with a discussion of briefing the agency secretaries what that agenda will be like, and what we will, how we can get that on the schedule, and who will participate. Then we'll move on to a presentation on microplastics and drinking water. And staying with the trash theme, we'll get an update from the Microplastics Subcommittee of the Trash Monitoring Work Group. And finally, we'll plan our meeting schedule and topics for the next year's council meetings and topics for the very next one. So are there any adjustments to the agenda that need to be made? Hearing none and seeing no hands up, I think we're good.
Great. So to the action items, I received no comments after circulating to the council members and alternates. So they are good to go and posted on our meetings webpage. So, unless there's any last minute comments. And this is so we'll move on to item 2. This is a chance for any members of the public that are attending to the meeting that would like to speak to the council on topics not on the agenda. If you are one of these members of the public that would like to speak, please raise your hand within the participant list and I will call upon you. I'm seeing none today. So we will move on to item 3. Karen.
Thanks, Nick. I am pleased as punch to get to introduce 3 new interim council members. Interim because we do need to go through the process of getting them appointed by the agency secretaries, but until then, they will serve as council members at our meetings. First off, we have long had discussions of making sure that we include Department of Public Health as a council member on the council. We have had in the past representation from public health from the drinking water program prior to the drinking water program moving over to the state water board. However, drinking water is not the only nexus we have with public health. And so it's important for us to have that strong connection. And so really happy to welcome Mark Starr as the representative from Department of Public Health. Do we have Mark on today?
Hi, Karen. This is Dave Mazzaro from Public Health.
Oh, yes, that's right. I knew you were going to be here.
Yes. Hi, I'm filling in for Mark today. He's out on vacation, which is a good thing for him. But I know he's pleased to be welcome to the committee and the council. And again, he couldn't attend. So I'm just filling in today and today only on his behalf. So thank you for the warm welcome. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Long time no hear your voice. So nice to hear you on and have you and Mark on board. The next representative is the newly nominated representative from the POTW community, Lorianne Fono. She is the executive director of the Bay Area Clean Water Association. We had a lovely meeting with Lorianne and really super excited to have her on board. Is Lorianne on?
I'm here, Karen.
Hi.
Hi there, and I'm honored to be invited to serve on this council.
Great. Any other background you wanted to share, or?
Sure. So way back, I came from academia and had a focus on compounds of emerging concern and moved into the environmental consulting field and ended up serving the entire POTW community in the Bay Area as a regulatory program manager at the Bay Area Clean Water Agencies. And since February 2020, a month before the beginning of the pandemic, I've been serving as executive director of that group. So I definitely bring a very Bay Area perspective, but I work closely with our sister associations in the Central Valley, the South Coast, and of course CASA. So be able to reflect the perspectives of the entire POTW community while meeting with this group. So I'm looking forward to serving.
Great, thank you. And we're super grateful to BACWA to allowing you to spend the time with us and work with the council. So thank you. And last but not least, we have Krista Kramer from CSU Coast, who is representing the academic community. You'll recall discussions of the need to have a representative from academia, from the science community, in addition to our sort of at-large science community representative. And not only do we have the academic community represented, but Krista also brings an ocean focus. Oh, sorry, I mispronounced Krista's name. I added an R where it didn't belong. So Krista Kramer. Is Krista on? I saw her earlier.
Yeah, I'm right here. Thanks, Karen. Did Nick correct you? I'm super sensitive about that. Thanks for inviting me to join the council. I'm really excited. I'm the director of the CSU Council on Ocean Affairs, Science and Technology, which is California State University's community system-wide network for marine, coastal, and coastal watershed related research. So we do a lot of ocean work, but I actually got my start in water quality. My first job out of grad school was at Squirt with Steve Weisberg. Steve, I still remember that day sitting in your office when you offered me a job. That was the beginning of my career. And I actually also worked on the Swamp Project when I was working at Moss Landing Marine Labs. So I have a background in water quality, and it's something I actually think is really interesting. I guess that's my nerdy side, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the executive level nerds of the Monitoring Council. Really happy to have you on board. We all have that desire to nerd out on data and stuff, I think. So great. Thank you for joining us today. And again, the next step is for us to propose appointments from the agency secretaries, and that'll be part of our briefing for them as well. So anything else on introductions, Nick?
I'll just say that our member page is updated with these new members and their bios if you're interested. Also for Krista, her alternate is Boykin Witherspoon. I'm not sure if he's on, but he represents the water WRPI Water Research and Policy Institute, which is another California State University organization under the director that allows us a real connection to the campuses across California. So really excited about that and having Krista and her experience as well. So feel free to take a look at their bios and reach out and make connections. So we're excited.
Thanks, Nick. All right. Well, then I think we'll move on to our item number 4. We're about 10 minutes early, so that's great. For announcements and updates from the council members, anyone have any announcements? Seems like the big thing that happens at this time of meetings is we hear about a bunch of retirements. So I'm hoping that that's not the case. But
we know the liaison, but we'll start. How about we start with you, and I'll just go down the list and see if there's.
Looks like Grant has his hand up.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Thank you very much, Karen and Nick. And no, I'm not announcing a retirement, but I did want to just let everyone know that the California Stormwater Quality Association held its annual conference on October 26th and 27th. It was another virtual event this year, another very successful virtual event. This was the second year in a row. Everyone met virtually. Hopefully next year it will be back live and in person. And then the first quarterly meeting, the Casco quarterly meeting, will be January 20th. And as with tradition, that features a kind of a state of stormwater in California update, and we usually have a number of folks representing US EPA Region 9, State Board, and regional boards lined up to update regulatory initiatives and emerging science and other updates. So that is going to be January 20th on Thursday, and that will be a virtual meeting. So anyone interested in attending that can sign up through the Casco website, and that's the only update I have.
Thanks, Grant. Helen.
Hi there. This is also not a retirement, more like a re-emergence. I've had a bunch of changes in 2021, including new location, new job, and a new little baby who's 3 months now, and I'm making a slow start back in the world of work and turning my brain back on. So I'm excited to be back and working now with the nonprofit Sierra Streams Institute up in Nevada City, managing their water quality monitoring lab. So nothing really to report other than I'm excited to be back and also to talk about the council with the community up here.
Great. Yeah, welcome back, Helen. Nice to have you, and congratulations on your new addition to your family.
Thank you.
Ray. You're on mute, Ray.
I know, I'm having trouble with that.
Oh, okay. There you are.
More of just a reminder than an announcement. I just, with the news cycle, everyone may have already forgotten that we had a nasty oil spill down here. So there was a lot of water quality work. I'm sure Grant was as busy as a lot of the rest of us were on that. And there's a lot of legislative work and other stuff to come on that. So with the news cycle, you know, a lot of folks might think it's already gone, but there's still cleanup activities going on, and just wanted to mention that, and that, you know, this is something we'll be dealing with for quite a while. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, good reminder. These things pop up in the news and they have a lot of airtime for a short period of time, and then they go away, but the problem still is there. And so, yeah, it's a good reminder. Thank you. Lorian.
Thanks, Karen. So the Clean Water Summit partners, and that is BACWA, CASA, CWEA, Civiqua, and SCAP are getting together to host an advanced treatment workshop that is scheduled for Monday, December 6th at 1 to 4:30 p.m. It's aimed at policymakers and is the goal is to discuss the opportunities and challenges associated with advanced treatment. So I'm going to put a link to the flyer in the chat here, and that also contains a registration link. So certainly everybody here is invited to that who's interested in attending.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Anyone else? Oh, Jared, please.
Hi, good morning, and no longer on the council, but just an update. We're so happy. I think "pleased as punched" is what your words were, Karen. That's a great phrase. Having Lori in here, Alma Moshoshi, who was our analyst, departed CASA, and she was serving as an alternate. We have another candidate. They're just going through their internal processes right now to kind of get that sign off. And then assuming that happens, we'll touch base with Nick and Karen and Mark on nominating them for that position. But yeah, just an update there, and hopefully we'll get that done for the next meeting.
Thanks, Jared. Steve, you're on mute.
I actually have a few announcements, all of them in regards to, I serve as the liaison to 3 of our committees, and we don't have a lot of our committee chairs here today. I want to make sure, Karen, that we encourage them to attend, because I think that's one of the things we wanted, so they're giving report outs. But I want to report out for, well, 3 of them, I guess. I don't have to report out for the one on trash, because we're going to hear about that, but a highly successful meeting. That group has some real legs, particularly given how there are a bunch of state requirements to move forward. So please do pay attention. when we hear some of the presentations you'll hear later today. But the two that are not here today that I want to report on are where we're at with the committee that we formed for molecular methods work group. That group continues to work exceptionally well. One of the things that I think you're going to find is that we're transitioning almost all of our monitoring towards molecular methods. And the group is when we formed not to solve a problem from the past, but to essentially plan for the future. Most of the committees in the past have been like, everybody's doing things differently. How do we get them to repair, in a sense, what they've done in the past? This is a group that is working to move forward in the future. One of the things that they are involved in very heavily is a workshop that will be held in person. We were able, in part because of that committee, to attract a national workshop to California. There is an eDNA workshop, that's extracellular DNA, the opportunity to essentially not have to go and collect a physical critter, but to sample the water and measure the DNA that that critter sheds. Within 10 years, that's what you all will be doing. And the federal agencies are putting together a workshop to chart their path in that direction, and wanted to meet specifically in California to tie in to that work group and the kind of other things that are going on here to make the connection to management at the local level, not just at the federal level. That workshop will be held February 1st and 2nd. It will be at SQUIRP. I strongly encourage you all to register while there's still room to do so. And Krista, you should, we really want to get people that are council oriented, but particularly for students and things, this is a tremendous opportunity to see kind of where this is going at the federal level. We have one day that's a training day where people get hands-on on how to do this. And a second day is kind of a policy transition day. So I'll paste a link in for you all if you have interest. We're going to fill up, so I strongly encourage you to sign up quickly. The second work group that I want to talk about is the wastewater-based epidemiology group. That group continues to meet on an every other week basis and is making a lot of progress on a lot of things. Obviously, you're going to hear later today about the resolution that that committee has put forward. But more importantly, what I want to alert you to is that, and make sure the council is in agreement with this, that the role of that committee is starting to change a little bit. It's starting to elevate a little bit in the sense that we were originally formed to create wastewater-based surveillance systems for COVID. What's happening now is that we are finding that this is so successful that one, the state public health department is actually creating a lab to support wastewater-based epidemiology, in part starting with COVID, but they want to move on to other things. So we as a group have talked about things like antibiotic resistance. We as a group have talked about other CECs, things that kind of can be more easily sampled through wastewater-based surveillance. So the committee is now transitioning to not just how do we make use of the data that's being collected for COVID, but how do we develop a laboratory process where all of the groups can be producing comparable data, including this new public health lab that will be created. We're going to plan some intercalibration exercises among them. And then how do we transition to other, and which other parameters that we want to be measuring. So I want to make sure the committee is comfortable with us expanding the role to wastewater-based evaluation in general, not just COVID specific. And then, of course, I'm glad to answer any questions about the progress of that group.
Well, personally, I support expanding the role. I think it's really going to need some resources, but it looks like it's getting some legs at DPH. And so definitely think that this is a tool that we should be at the ready for whatever comes at us next after. Hopefully we'll eventually be done with COVID at some point. But any other thoughts or questions for Steve? I know I have. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, for what it's worth, Mark Starr is one of the key players on that committee, and he's been wonderful. I'm glad to have him on the council.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, seeing no additional hands up besides two more council members who want to make some comments. Peter, did you have a question for Steve or you have an update? Okay, good. Then next I'll go to Terry Fleming.
Hi, Karen and the council. I just wanted to remind folks that the infrastructure bill passed, and it's going to mean a significant amount of funds for infrastructure in California. But one thing that might be of interest to folks on the council is that the San Francisco Bay money, there's usually about $5 million a year that's given to San Francisco Bay. It has been increased to 24 million. I don't know when the money is coming in soon, but there'll be some big opportunities there. And I'm going to actually leave for about an hour to hear the details of the monies for Region 9. So I want to let you know that too.
Thanks, Terry. Krista.
Thanks. Nick suggested I let you all know about the COAST annual meeting, which we held last Friday, November 5th. I will put a link here in the chat. It was all recorded, and so the recordings will actually be up by the end of the day today. So in the morning, we had a couple lightning talks from a program that we run called the State Science Information Needs Program, which is a $3 million program that was funded with a one-time allocation from the state about 2 years ago. So these are large research projects, and two of the talks that morning were on microplastics and microfibers work that we supported. Then we had a keynote speaker in the middle of the day who talked about including people from including people from historically excluded groups in conservation and ecology and the ways that they're doing that, particularly at UC Santa Cruz. And then we have an additional round of lightning talks in the afternoon that span a variety of topics, but you may be interested in some of them. And I wanted to point out some of the work that I think that is going on that I think is probably really interesting in the context of this council is people looking at post-fire impacts on erosion and mobilization of contaminants from materials in the watershed into our waterways. And so that's some of the stuff that you would see in those afternoon lightning talks. Thanks.
Thanks, Krista. Peter.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I serve in an advisory role for the Safe to Eat work group that is co-chaired by Jay Davis and Anna Holder. I just wanted to let everybody know that the realignment group that's associated with Safe to Eat that is engaging in conversations with historically underrepresented communities to ensure that monitoring is occurring in the correct places and that the correct types of organisms are being monitored. Those discussions are ongoing. The next realignment meeting is, I believe, next week. And so I'll be participating in that. It's being led by Anna Holder. And yeah, just wanted to give that update.
Thanks, Peter. Anyone else? If not, I have one update I want to make, which is that my staff at Division of Water Quality at State Board is getting ready to bring the integrated report, the 2020-2022 integrated report before the board, the State Water Board in January. It will be the first report that is adopted or considered for adoption on time ever, I think, for one thing, and also under the court order that required us to get them on time. And so I wanted to mention it here because the integrated report is one of the foundational reasons, actually one of the foundational ways that we assess data at the State Water Board and assess readily available data. And one of the reasons why the council was formed, because the assessment doesn't exactly represent how we would assess data necessarily across the state. And so, we're getting there, but anyway, just thought that would be of interest to you all. We're also actively working on the 2024 report as we speak, assessing those data and working with the Office of Information Management and Analysis to make sure that we continue to work with stakeholders to get their data into the California Environmental Data Exchange Network. And so if it's of at any interest for this group, it might be useful to have an update in the coming year on the integrated report and the kinds of things that we're doing to improve the automation of the report and get the data out to the public so they can do their own assessments. So that was one. And then the second one is, since last we met, I have had a son-in-law, I should say. My daughter got married on October 23rd. And if I tell anyone that I have a captive audience, whether you want to hear it or not. So I thought I'd just let you know that my cup of joy is overflowing still. It was a lovely event. So with that, I think I don't see any more hands up to make announcements. So I think we have wrapped up that the council member updates. I know, Nick, you would like to give an overview of where we are with AB 1066 and the role the council will play in implementation of it. So it's your turn.
Great, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Great updates. I'll go ahead and go through some updates. I wanted to point out just quickly in the chat, Greg Gearhart, who is our alternate for the Cal EPA, he's here too, but he pointed out an interesting part of the federal infrastructure bill and the fact that it has a lot of water data emphasis, and in fact has a mandate that water data adhere to the Internet of Water principles, and he has a link to that, so that could be of interest to many of you. Greg and the Water Board have been working closely with the Internet of Water team for quite some time now, so the Water Board at least is well poised. But if you have any questions on that, you should reach out to Greg or myself, and we can hopefully connect the dots. On to other updates. The biggest one, as it applies to the council as a whole, was that AB 1066, the high priority inland water sites, was signed by the governor on October 8th, and so has since been chaptered. That bill is one of the first bills that names the council as a key entity and has key deliverables assigned to the council, as well as a timetable regarding the development of a work group and providing recommendations. So I encourage you all to read that bill, but I wanted to, at the time of the last meeting, I wasn't quite sure if it was going to pass, but it has definitely passed and is now into law, which is exciting. There is an interesting part for the next steps. A lot of the next steps are confidential, so I can't speak too much about it, but there is a fiscal analysis that came out of the Appropriations Committee that is public and outlines some of the resources that were discussed as part of this bill development regarding resources for staffing a work group to help us achieve those deliverables in a timely manner. There's a focus on the State Water Board as well as a CDPH co-chairing that work group. So I encourage you all to look at that fiscal analysis for more details. And as I work through the process with Karen and Greg from the Water Board perspective, I'll keep you updated as I can. But exciting news. We're on somebody's radar, and we're moving forward with a really key data gap that we've been emphasizing through the Safe to Swim work group for some time now, about the protection of public health at freshwater bathing sites. So this is a really exciting development. Along those lines, our coastal monitoring program is going to have a lull in staffing. Karen Black was the staff person leading that group, and she's taken another position elsewhere. So the Division of Water Quality is looking to fill that role. But in the meantime, for contacts within that coastal beach monitoring group, you should reach out to Catherine Walsh at the Division of Water Quality or myself, and I can connect the dots for the beach monitoring. I'll stop there for a minute if there are any questions on AB 1066. again, there's not too much I can say, but I do encourage you to take a look at the physical analysis and the bill language itself, as well as the deliverables. There is some pretty quickly moving parts over the next 2 years that's going to be pretty aggressive. So there's going to be a lot to come in starting next year.
Brian Lawrenson has his hand up.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna, thanks, Nick. I was just gonna emphasize that point about the pretty tight timelines, right? It's July of 2022, right? There's July 2023 that there's a report due, and then the end of 2023 is when we have to have recommendations, as my read of the legislation. And I assume that we're going to get briefed in the next meeting or something on kind of what our obligations are and all that kind of stuff. It sounds like that's sort of your timetable, Nick.
Yeah, that's right. So as we work through the resource allocation process, that'll really outline clearly the timeline and how we're going to try to achieve those fast moving pieces. Ideally we would have the steps would be, in my mind, identify staff to help lead this work group, create a work group of experts that are qualified to help us with the definition of what an inland recreational site is, our high priority inland recreational site is, and then move through those processes. So it's going to be, the work is going to come from this work group, whether that builds off of our existing inland beach monitoring work group, would probably be a good place to start. But having just those key people to help lead the effort is going to be where it comes from, and that work group is going to be tasked by the council to help meet those deliverables and then really provide the recommendations to council, who then moves those forward. So there's a clear path there. It's just a matter of finding those key staff people from the Water Board and CDPH to really take that out as their main duties. Thanks for the question. Other updates, we held I believe our 6th trash data dive at the end of October. It was a really great event. We had some great keynote address by Captain Charles Moore, gave an inspiring talk about plastic and trash in the ocean. We also had 3 great breakout groups focused on storytelling with trash. Another one that was really popular was the Track 2 amendments, and how to deal with data issues revolving around the Track 2 compliance with the trash amendments. As well as our 3rd one was focused on a continuation of using machine learning and artificial intelligence for trash monitoring purposes. We had a great presentation from Google, who is building off of some of the AI machine learning work, which is a great thing to hear about the private industry, providing some open information for us to utilize. There was also a presentation from Clean California. I encourage you to check out those videos. They're all available on our YouTube website and linked on the Trash Data Dive website, which I can drop in the chat. It's also linked in the, I'll just drop in the chat. Also, other meetings that I've been sitting on are steering committees that I sit on. I sit on the Southern California Stormwater Monitoring Coalition. They're moving forward with their research project, making a lot of good progress there. I also sit on the steering committee for the Water Data Consortium. Just ended their first year with Tara Moran as the CEO, and they're moving along with several key pilot projects revolving around open water data. They've been working closely with the partner agency team, which this council is named under AB. Why am I blanking on that? It's AB 16. Oh God, AB 1755. How I forgot that. The Open and Transparent Water Data Act as a partner, including State Water Board and led by Department of Water Resources. So a lot of great work being done in the consortium space. Also, for the National Water Quality Monitoring Council, I sit on that council as the EPA Region 9 state representative. We've been working a lot with them on their own justice, equity, diversion, and inclusion work. They, like us, have been trying to create a work group, or they have created a work group under that to help provide resources to the state and federal partners doing similar work in the water quality space. We were able to leverage some resources at EPA, and they created a new website, which I'll also likewise drop it in the chat when I get a second. They're leveraging their HERO network, which is generally a research site, but it's curated by librarians, and we've got access to our own space that allows for people to include racial equity resources, articles, videos, and other resources that can be curated and posted there and shared. So I'm working with the Cal EPA to find us space on their next agenda to talk about how we could possibly review those resources and then add some California specific resources to that platform. So that's exciting news. Also within the molecular methods space, we have within SWAMP a new staff person, Charles Brook, who is within the SWAMP IQ and has got a microbiology background. His primary work is going to be working with the molecular methods group, looking at the SOPs. That molecular methods work group has created several SOPs that they are looking to get feedback on and to share. So if you have, I was thinking of Krista and some of the CSU folks that if they're looking to maybe start an eDNA process, I'm sure that they'll talk about this at the SQUIRP workshop as well, but utilizing those SOPs and reviewing them prior to beginning a eDNA or molecular methods monitoring program would be really valuable. They've really got a great group of experts that have developed those with experience from international and national experts. And Charles is helping review those. SWAMP is also kicking off a pilot project to do their own ENA sampling, which is exciting, and that's being led by Peter Hoopt at SWAMP. So all great things. And that'll do it for my updates. Are there any questions? And if anyone is looking to connect with any of those groups and or ask questions more specifically about the SMC or the Water Consortium or the National Council, just please reach out. And they're great connections to have if you're looking to elevate some research or some work that you're doing. I make a lot of connections with the work groups to those entities so that they can make presentations about the products that they're developing. Just recently made a connection with SFEI and the Eco Outlets group to make presentations to a couple of those groups. But likewise, if any of you have important topics that you'd like to reach out to those sectors, just please don't hesitate to give me a call or hit me on the email.
All right, thanks, Nick. Well, we'll move on to our first update from one of our working groups, from Peter Vroom on the Justice, Equity, Diversity Initiative work group. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone. And Nick, I apologize. I forgot I wasn't in the driver's seat for the presentation.
Do you want to be? You can certainly.
It doesn't matter. I animated most of the bullet points. So if I can say next, advance them for me, or you can give it to me. Either way. Whatever
you're most comfortable with. I don't care.
I'll just say next, and then you can advance them. And then yeah. All right. Thank you. So today I'm excited to present updates on what is now known as the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or JEDI Working Group, which until recently was a council subcommittee. Next, please. And next again. So after a hiatus of about 9 months, the JEDI subcommittee met on September 20th, and a presentation was created by my two co-chairs, Shelley Walther and Anna Holder, and we reviewed and prioritized proposed goals and projects for the working group, and also discussed expectations and logistics. It was during this meeting that it was decided that the JEDI subcommittee should actually be a JEDI working group. And this is because council subcommittees typically are focused on defined projects that have an end date. Because we want JEDI initiatives to become a permanent aspect of all council activities, a JEDI working group was deemed to be more appropriate. This then led to a discussion about leadership. Council members typically sit on subcommittees, whereas on subcommittees, but usually assume only an advisory role when it comes to working groups. And I'm going to discuss that a little bit later on, the implications of that a little bit later on in the presentation. Nick, can you, yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, a week after we had this meeting, both of my co-chairs, Shelley and Anna, stepped down from their leadership roles as co-chairs for no other reason than the fact that they have a lot on their plates and were swamped and realized that they probably couldn't commit as much time as was necessary to be co-chairs of the group. This led us into a bit of a quandary as to exactly how to proceed next. But nevertheless, Nick continued development of the JEDI Working Group web pages, and they became active on the My Water Quality website in October. Next. Later in October, Nick, Anna, and I did meet to have a really frank conversation about how to establish a realistic path forward in terms of leadership and goals for the JEDI Working Group. And during that meeting, we identified 3 key management issues that we feel needed to be solved. Next, please. So the first of these issues is that in some other council working groups, conducting work and analyses for the working group is part of people's regular full-time job. In other words, they get paid to do work that benefits the working group. And we realize that as far as the JEDI working group goes, there likely will never be any leadership or participants who have JEDI responsibilities that are written into their full-time job descriptions. Yet in order for the JEDI working group to be successful, a significant amount of work is going to be necessary. And so we began questioning, how do we find the human resources that the council and the working groups are going to need to actually fulfill JEDI goals? The second issue we identified is because we don't have dedicated personnel who can spend a lot of time focused on JEDI goals, we probably need to reprioritize the goals and projects that we came up with and focus on establishing basics to just get the JEDI working group up and running. And also to provide education that's needed to inform both council members as well as working group members about JEDI topics. And finally, the third issue we identified was that the goals and projects weren't clearly linked for the group. There were no defined sponsors for the projects, deliverables or deadlines, which meant that work wasn't really moving forward. And so that's something that we wanted to try and fix. Next slide, please, Nick. So I revised the goals and projects for the working group, and these are what I hope will form the basis for our discussion today. None of this is set in stone, and we'd really like to hear council feedback and suggestions on whether we have the right thing in mind or whether people have alternate ideas of where we should be heading. So goal 1 is to create mechanisms for implementing JEDI initiatives into all monitoring council work groups. Next, please, Nick. So the first project is pretty simple. The JEDI working group doesn't currently have a charter. And so I am going to put together a draft charter by the end of the year. And then we will send it out for review to key people who probably could provide a good input and suggestions on that. Next, please. The second project, and this is one that I think we need to have some conversation about, is we would like council to request that each working group identify members who will serve as Jedi ambassadors, not only to promote Jedi initiatives within their own working groups, but also to serve on the Jedi working group. And if we do decide to move in this direction, I would like to try and collect names from all the working groups, again, by the end of the year in preparation for a meeting that we hope to be holding soon. Next, please. The meeting that we'd like to hold will be shortly after the new year. Before that meeting happens, I would like to send out an email requesting nominations for people to serve as co-chairs of the Jedi Working Group. And then during the first meeting, we would elect those co-chairs. I will continue to serve in an advisory role. I'm happy to do as much work as I can. Just with my full-time job, the amount of effort that I can devote will be somewhat limited. So we are hoping that these co-chairs that get elected will be really motivated and willing to take on some of the heavy lifting that will be required to move the Jedi Working Group forward. Next, please. One of the things that we would like the Jedi ambassadors for all the working groups to do is to revise the working group missions and charters to reflect the Jedi initiatives that we hope will become pervasive throughout all aspects of council, and also add a goal to try and increase diversity among its membership. Next, please. And we'd also like to ask the Jedi ambassadors to create and initiate a plan to increase outreach and partnership activities with historically and institutionally disadvantaged communities. Next, please. And then finally, we would like the co-chairs of the Jedi Working Group to draft a Jedi resolution that the council can consider for adoption, and then we could hopefully place it prominently on our webpage. Next slide, please. The second goal that we would like to continue, and we don't have a good mechanism for how we're going to do this at this point in time, but is to continue outreach, no, I'm sorry, not outreach, education for both the council itself, as well as for working groups on Jedi initiatives, just to provide more information for all of us and hopefully make this something that we will be thinking about continually as we strive to move forward with other council initiatives. Next, please. Oh, and next one again. Thank you. And then the third goal that we'd like to continue with is to provide resources on Jedi initiatives and that sort of thing. Shelley Walther did an excellent job of collecting a lot of web resources. Those have already been put on the Jedi web pages. The web pages are obviously a living document, and we will continue adding to them and modifying as appropriate. Next, please. And again, yeah. Okay, some of the goals that we feel are exceptionally important, but we just don't have the people right now to actually move them forward in any sort of meaningful context. The Jedi Working Group, it would be great if eventually they can help drive Jedi initiatives to affect water quality for all people living in California, especially those that have been burdened by multiple sources of pollution and disproportionately impacted by its effects. This is going to be a large topic of conversation, not only for the council itself, but for members of the working group. And how do we move forward to do this? Next, please. And then the last goal that would be something for the future is to develop ways to quantify and track issues pertaining to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Next, please. All right, so the requests we have for council today, as I indicated earlier, I am happy to continue remaining as the council advisor or a council advisor to the Jedi Working Group. There are other council members who are also already sitting on the Jedi Working Group, and we just like to encourage everybody who is interested to potentially attend the JEDI working group meetings and serve in an advisory capacity. There's going to be lots of different aspects of this that are going on throughout all the different working groups. And I think to have as many people providing ideas and suggestions of what we can do to try and increase diversity, attract people to our working groups, it would be great to have all of those ideas. Next, please. And that's the end of the presentation that I had prepared today, but we'd love to have some discussion and hear about thoughts and ideas from other council members on whether we're headed in the right track and other things that potentially we should be doing. Helen.
Hey, Peter.
Hey.
Thanks so much for taking this on. Sorry, everything kind of disintegrated. I'm sorry I haven't been as active this last year, or active at all this last year. Also, Nick, the webpage looks great. So awesome work with that. Yeah, I don't have that much to add other than that. I think the direction you're on is great. I think the issues are pretty obvious in trying to find people who have this as part of their full-time job. And I think kind of changing tack and making a work group and trying to get real buy-in from the other work groups is a great way to go. And I'll try to support that as best I can.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts, ideas, discussion? Krista.
Thanks. I'm excited about this. Actually, Shelley and I have talked about this a lot over the last 6 months, and Coast is doing a lot of work in this area, so I'd be happy to contribute. One of the things that I think is probably really important is to make sure that the people that we're trying to impact are represented somehow in the working group so that we can hear directly from them rather than what we might think is the best way to proceed. I don't know how we would do that, but that's my suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that, I'm hoping once we identify some JEDI ambassadors for all the working groups, that they can, because it will probably differ from work group to work group, they can really put on their thinking caps and help come up with some outreach activities and find ways to attract those people who should be part of the working groups and aren't at this point in time, because yeah, we should not be making decisions for a lot of people. We need them to actually be letting us know, how we can help them. And I realize it's not necessarily their, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not their, we shouldn't task them. Yeah, we need to be the ones kind of reaching out and trying to establish trust and building relationships. It's up to us to do a lot of that work. Ray.
Thanks. I think this is a great direction and what we should be doing. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because I hear it a lot, is there's a lot of efforts to recruit folks from diverse communities to be on different boards and everything like that. One of the things to think about is capacity issues. So I know we don't have any funding or anything like that, but that's that's always a reality with a lot of folks. Is there that ability for them to do that with their capacity? So I just wanted to bring that particular issue up.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Greg.
Yeah, thanks. Hi. Couple of thoughts. One, I'm hearing that you have lean resources, but you want to expand this out to every part of the council's working groups, which I totally support. But I'm thinking, other examples that I've seen and been part of, there's usually a piloting effort, and one opportunity pilot might be with 1066 and the Safe to Swim. And there's definitely an intersection between legislative mandate, the work that's ahead of you, the fact that there might be some resources coming to help, and the communities that we're trying to advance racial equity and other kinds of equity in. So that's one idea, is to use something like that as a potential pilot project to try to like go deep instead of go wide, kind of a thought. And then related to that, there are some potential partnerships out there. I know American Rivers has an initiative in Central Valley. I think they got some grant money to try to build better access to waterways in riparian areas, in park and outdoor space, in areas that don't currently have access to that. So there are some potential partners that could explore like what that means to be, safe to swim is a pretty broad charge, really, in my opinion. So that's my thought, and I support all the work that you guys are doing. It's great.
Great. Thank you. And you will probably be an important part of the educational aspect of everything that's been going on. The presentations that you gave to council last year were excellent. And so, yeah, we're hoping that maybe we can continue a little bit more of that.
Sure. And like another role that I can play is direct some of the team that I oversee to develop data resources or to expand data like ecosystems. We have some projects already that have demonstrated that. And yeah, as we move forward, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of data sets are out there. I've been looking around and keeping my eye on stuff. There is a really interesting health equity index in California that has data associated with access to parks, and it has environmental issues, but they're more like drinking water and air quality issues. But over time, I think we'll see some more refined data products that can really intersect with the council's work on multiple topics. So I'm happy to work with you guys. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Anna.
Hey y'all, sorry I can't use my video. My network is glitchy this morning. So totally just want to second everything everyone else has just said, but also note that I don't think it should be a requirement for people to have justice, equity, diversity, or inclusion in their duty descriptions for them to engage and participate. In fact, I think it's important that we all do it regardless of what's in our duty descriptions. And noting that, the Safe to Eat work group and bioaccumulation monitoring program realignment is attempting to incorporate these principles into our work. And in 2022, I will be conducting outreach throughout the state to tribes to gauge their interest in participating in the realignment. And so through that effort, I might also be able to gauge their interest in other things and can share that information with their permission to other working groups. So, definitely wanting to make sure that no work group feels like they have to do this alone, and that we should utilize the council and leverage each other's efforts and resources to do this as efficiently as possible. It just so happens that the Safe to Eat work group has a year ahead of a lot of other folks. So happy to continue to provide insights and resources and how-to tips as we move forward. And also to note that data are important, but to achieve the inclusion and belonging that we should be striving for, trust and partnership needs to be a key factor. So seconding, what Krista mentioned about making people feel included in these systems, and seconding what Ray said, that we shouldn't be trying to extract information or work for free from these individuals or groups. And so that's something that we need to work towards long-term and incorporate into our systems.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, one thing I would just like to ask before concluding is, Greg, I heard what you said about go deep rather than go wide. I totally understand that. And, I think a pilot project might be an excellent idea. But what does everybody think about asking the existing working groups to try and provide, a primary JEDI ambassador to serve on the JEDI working group? My biggest concern is we need people power to have these discussions and to move things ahead. And we need co-chairs, quite honestly, to help with this, because the group needs leadership in order to discuss, a lot of the things that we brought up today. And so just in order to kind of establish that core group, the leadership that we're going to need, is it worthwhile asking all the working groups to identify somebody within those groups to kind of serve in this role? And if we don't get a lot of feedback, I will just move ahead with the initiative to do that at this point in time.
Yeah, I think asking makes sense. I think compelling in some way, we don't really have the ability to compel that volunteer ambassador to join, but certainly asking, I think, makes sense. And, many of our agencies are working on activities like this. And so there may be more interest than we might think. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it was interesting when we had the work group meeting in September. The invitation accidentally got sent out to a wider group of people than was originally intended. And there was a lot of people that showed up. They were very, very interested. So I'm hoping that there will be the motivation and the interest to not only participate, but for some people to step up and really take a leadership role and help push things forward. Okay, Greg, you still have a hand up. I don't know if that's because you still have a question or a comment. No, okay. Lorian.
Yeah, just following up on a couple of the comments on the chat. I think that it would be handy for the work group to develop a list of best practices, and not necessarily in isolation. This is something that's being worked on throughout government and I guess government adjacent groups. And so perhaps convening some sort of partnership with these other groups who have thought long and hard about this and how to implement it would be a good first step, and then be able to bring in the other ones of the council's working groups to help implement that.
Very good. Yeah, I agree. Okay, if there are no further comments or questions, I guess I will turn it back over to Nick and Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks for putting together the nice presentation and getting the discussion going. Appreciate your effort.
You're welcome.
All right, the next item is just generally resolutions, although I think the goal is to hopefully get you all to approve. One thing that I wanted to just query, I'm hopeful that some of the utilities that are being recognized as part of this resolution and the one that our State Water Board will be considering on Tuesday are present. I know at least one was interested in joining today, called me yesterday, the City of Davis. So I'm hopeful that they're on and listening. I'm going to start off with the resolution before us, and then we'll turn to the process for approving resolutions moving forward, if that's okay with you, Nick. Does that make sense?
That sounds great.
Okay, so the idea, I can't take credit for the idea, although absolutely supportive of the suggestion. I believe it was Allie Bain from Stanford, who has been really a very strong leader in the research associated with wastewater-based epidemiology from the beginning of the pandemic. She suggested that we should recognize the utilities that have participated, and I thought that was a great idea, and moved forward initially with the idea that the State Water Board would consider a resolution. The subcommittee, they're a subcommittee, right? Wastewater-based epidemiology subcommittee, also suggested that the monitoring council consider a resolution. So we're doing sort of parallel efforts from both the council as well as the water boards, and the resolutions are very similar. And basically it goes through the history of where we were in early 2020 and how the research really has been, well, California has been a leader in the research and driving the development of standardized protocols and quality assurance protocols. And the utilities have really stepped up and partnered with the State Water Board, with public health, with scientific and academia, communities in California to really, voluntarily put their resources out there to collect samples, in some cases do the analysis in their own labs, and have really stepped up with their own, at their own expense to be part of something that they weren't required to do. Nobody sent them an order to say, you have to do this monitoring. It was all in the interest of supporting public health decision-making around COVID. So you guys have a copy of the resolution, I believe was included with the agenda materials. I'm not going to go through it. Although let me just put up one slide that I have for the board meeting on, can I have control? Oh, I haven't done this in a while.
You should be able to.
So let's see if I can share my screen. Here we go, share screen. And I want to share this one. Can you guys see that? What do you see?
Let me see. Yes.
Okay, so let me just quickly go to the slide that lists all of the utilities. It's going to look small, but this is the group of utilities that we're proposing to recognize as part of this resolution. They come in a variety of levels of participation, which is articulated in the resolution. This slide just lists them all in alphabetical order. But it's quite a number of utilities, pretty impressive group, all of whom, volunteered, as I said, to collect samples or even go above and beyond that in some instances. And many of them continue to do monitoring for COVID in their waste streams and biosolids. And so, so just an impressive group. Really want to express my appreciation and want to, propose to the council. I don't know, do we take a vote? How are we doing this? We haven't set forth our process for adopting resolutions, but it seems like discussion and motion and a vote would be an appropriate process for today, and we can talk about the future process moving forward. So any questions, thoughts before any discussion?
I just wanted to thank you, Karen, for your kind words about the utilities. I'm looking over this list and you can see that it goes from the hugest wastewater agencies like LACSD to several of VACWA's members who are less than 1 MGD. And I just got to tell you that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was such a wellspring of enthusiasm to help any way that we could. And if you think about some of these tiny agencies at the same time, we're juggling having to deal with separating their staff for the first time because of COVID restrictions, what that meant to them. It really speaks to the commitment to serving public health, not just in traditional ways, but in these new and innovative ways. So thank you, Karen.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Lorian. Appreciate your comments. Any others? Oh, thank you. I can return. Spare me screwing up and showing you wedding pictures instead of my presentation. So I mean, this is motherhood and apple pie. In my opinion, I think it's definitely well worth our effort to put this together. I do want to thank Steve Weisberg and Greg Kester from CASA, who really worked closely with me to draft a resolution, get it approved by the subcommittee. I also borrowed many of the edits to draft the resolution that the state board will consider on Tuesday. And so thank you, Steve and Greg. Greg also ran down contacts for almost all of the facilities that were on the list. We had a couple that we filled in with our data from CWIX and contacted all of the folks to let them know they would be recognized today as well as on Tuesday. So thank you, Steve. And Greg's, I don't know if Greg is on today or intended to be, but he was very helpful as well. So do I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. Or actually, am I official yet? I haven't been voted, so I can't, huh?
And then I'll make the motion.
Thanks.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I can second.
Great, thank you, Mark. We have a motion and a second. I think for just being very formal and following protocol, Nick, would you do a roll call vote? Oh, Ray, please, go ahead.
Oh, I was just responding. Nick said, raise your hand.
Oh, okay.
That's my fault. I'll go through the roll call.
Yeah, let's do a roll call vote just to have it all formalized, and then we can talk about process.
Sure. Sorry about that, Ray. Callie, PA.
Yes.
CNRA, I see Chad on there. He's the alternate.
Yes, if Mark's not here.
Great. Approve. Division of Drinking Water, not here. Let's see, Stormwater.
Yes.
Agriculture.
Yes.
Citizen science, citizen monitoring groups.
Yes.
The public.
Yes.
Scientific community, non-academic.
Yes.
Obviously, you made the motion. Water supply.
Since I represent one of the agencies being recognized, I'm going to abstain.
Great. And the motion moves unanimously. Any opposed? Great.
All right, well, thank you. I do want to mention before we talk about process, the next step is that Mark and I will sign the resolution and get copies out to all of the utilities so they have that for printing and framing. Hopefully they are proud of the recognition, and I'll just say I got a lot of responses from utilities when I sent the email notifying them of the recognition, thanking us for even considering the recognition, and really appreciative of our willingness to recognize them. So it was a fun email to send and a fun email to receive back from the various utilities that responded. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. So, so that was the first resolution we've ever adopted as a body, strangely enough. We have approved things. I don't know that we've ever done it by resolution, but it warrants some documentation of our process so that in the future, if we have a need to resolve, to do something or recognize anyone, that we have a process in place. And so Nick has put together a proposed process. Nick, do you want to walk us through it?
Sure, I can do that. So I basically just utilized the process that we went through on a similar basis for this one that we just approved, and thought about some of the resolutions that we would work through if I were proposing one to the State Water Board. So with that in mind, the first step would be obviously a council member or alternate identifies what I'm assuming is a potential project or an effort that's warranting council recognition in the form of a resolution. And then the following step would be that the council member then works with me, the director, to develop a draft resolution utilizing a template that we put together, which again was leveraging an effort that we utilized at the State Water Board when designing a resolution to provide to the clerk, who then elevates that to the State Water Board. So there's a template there that you can utilize for formatting, and it allows you to fill in the information that you see fit within that resolution. The following step is, once that was in a place where you felt comfortable that it was in a draft form, present that draft at a meeting with myself and the co-chairs to get immediate feedback from them based on their expertise. Obviously, Karen and Mark deal with resolutions on a very high frequency, so they can have some interesting feedback on the draft. Once that feedback is received and the adjustments made, we can then present that draft resolution to the council for approval at a meeting in the future, similar to what we just did now. And then you would basically present the resolution, why the resolution was, why we feel the resolution was warranted, and then hear comments and then approval. And then, as Karen just outlined, the next step, assuming it was approved, we get signatures by the co-chairs and then posted to our webpage and sent out to the layers list. That's a quick, pretty straightforward process. I'd love to get any comments. We sent this out in an email to the members and alternates about a week ago. Didn't hear anything directly regarding it. I was hoping to keep it more simple than complicated. So if there's any feedback now on the draft, or not the draft, but the template or this process in general, now would be the time.
Well, I think it worked for this resolution. It may need to be tweaked potentially if we come up against something more controversial. But personally, I think this works well. But of course, it's modeled on what I do every day in my job. So definitely one of the comments we got from some of the subcommittee members was, boy, this is awfully, formal and awfully lots of effort put into it, lots of process that goes into it, and it took a long time, which is true. And I think part of it, it wouldn't be as time consuming, I think, if it was just a council resolution, but we also wanted to have the state board separately recognize these utilities. And so that put a lot of sort of bureaucracy into the mix as well. So I'm not sure how we minimize that, but definitely something to be aware of.
Sure. Yeah, one thing that I was also looking at the template for a water board, it's those would be generally signed by the clerk. Obviously don't have a clerk, so I think it's appropriate to have the co-chair sign it. But what the clerk would do following an official motion at a state water board meeting is they provide the members and how they voted. So seats that says aye, in this case Peter abstained, and obviously drinking water wasn't there. So if that could be something, if there was something more controversial and there was a desire to have a more clear finding on how the council as a individual basis voted, that we can certainly add that as well. Any other comments from anybody?
Sounds like we'll just go with this for now.
Silence is, exuberant appreciation for the work, and they love it.
Yes. I do want to mention just quickly, if you read the resolution, it's very focused on what the utilities did and their partnerships with the State Water Board, DPH, and other academic and research institutions. It doesn't tell the whole story of everyone that has been involved and how the state board, what we've done, and what CDPH has done. There's a lot behind that as well, and could have been a very long resolution and could have recognized everybody under the sun. But we were intentionally trying to focus it on what the utilities did and really focus the recognition on the utilities work. Yeah, that I just wanted to make that clear.
Thanks for that, Karen. Well, with that, we're just about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great. We didn't have a public forum, so let's go ahead and take a short bio break. Be back. I'll fix the slide. Be back at 11:10.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
All right, should we get started again, Nick?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Hopefully everybody has returned from their break. Next item on the agenda is preparing for briefing the agency secretaries, and Nick has proposed suggested topics for the briefing. I think it's optimistic to think we're going to get an hour with them. So I think we should plan on 30 minutes. And then, some discussion amongst us about who should participate in the briefing and what our final topics and briefing notes will look like. So with that, Nick, do you want to just walk us through what you're proposing so we can tee up the discussion?
Sure. So as part of our strategic planning effort, we recognize that we need to do a better job of connecting with the secretaries. We have two great co-chairs that have good relationships with our new secretaries, new work secretaries. And so now would be the time to start fulfilling our obligation to brief the secretaries and provide key recommendation to them, at least on an annual basis. Oops, typo. But yeah, as Karen mentioned, I put 60 minutes in there, recognizing that was kind of the best case scenario, but more than likely it will be 30 minutes. And I proposed this. I engaged the co-chairs and Karen and Mark to say, hey, it's about how do we go about engaging with the secretaries and thinking about things that we should be briefing them on and providing recommendations on. Some of the potential topics that I had thought and that we discussed briefly was any sort of work group and council accomplishments. We spoke about a couple of the work groups in the molecular methods, and I know that the Safe to Eat work group and some of the other work groups have had some accomplishments we could highlight. But again, we have to keep in mind the time limitation. So if it comes down to that we have 20-30 minutes of their time, it's probably better to focus on the other key topics, including providing them the recommendation to approve the new members, and then even more importantly, a recommendation for resource opportunities. We're a little ahead of schedule. Mark Gold had some ideas here that I was hoping he could delve in on, but we also could highlight AB 1066, which they may not have an immediate recollection on, and remind them of how the council is named and the importance of that legislation. But then there's also other ideas that we would like to hear from the council members at large, if on topics that they would like to elevate to the secretary. And then some other key questions that I had, just based on previous, engagements with the secretaries. Do we need a subcommittee for this? Do we need some, like, a smaller group of people to discuss topics? Are there so many topics that we need to really prioritize them? Beyond the co-chairs and myself, who else should be invited to the briefing? And then what is the, several typos, what is the ideal timing for the briefing? So those are just some of the key topics that we could discuss.
Well, going back to the content, my suggestion would be using the accomplishments to tee up what are next steps that we could build on those accomplishments, and what kind of products could we produce, what kind of added value could we produce if we got support from the secretaries to seek additional funding. Now, that said, the type of funding that I can advocate for has been relatively unsuccessful at getting any resources to the council. And I do not know to what degree the agency secretaries would be able to influence that, but definitely worth the discussion with them as to what value added the council brings to the state and what products we could produce if we had more resources. I think that's where our focus ought to be.
I'd like to second that, Karen. I think that we should use this opportunity to not only illustrate what we have accomplished, but get buy-in on where we want to go next, so that when we come back a year later, they're not surprised by what we found. They are already bought into the fact that they need that. And then I think we should have asks associated each year. You mentioned finances. In some cases, it may be finances. But I'm thinking it also can be other kinds of asks for help. And sometimes that could come in the form of staff help. Sometimes that can come in the form of connecting us to other states or other vehicles for accomplishing it. So I'm strongly in agreement with where you're headed. Karen, did you want feedback on the other aspects, or did you want to just keep it with the nature of the briefing?
I think we want feedback on all aspects of this. And Evelyn also has her hand up, but go ahead, Steve.
So Nick, maybe you go to the next slide. I think the answer to your first question, do we need a subcommittee for this? I think we do. I think we want to get broad consensus among this group. You're not going to try and do it with everybody in a meeting like this, but having some sort of subcommittee that probably even includes some of the chairs of the more active committees, because again, a lot of the help that they need, a lot of help needed is going to come from them. So I don't think it has to be limited to just council members. Beyond the co-chairs and directors who should be invited to the briefing, I don't know who and how many yet. I'd like to hear other people's input, but I'm sure it's more than just the two, because in particular, I think you want somebody who's associated with whatever asks, so they can speak a little bit deeper if it goes in that direction. But more importantly, there are certain things that you and Mark Gold as state employees can't opine on or can't even ask for, that others of us might be more empowered to do. So just some additional thoughts to get the conversation started.
Evelyn, you have your hand up.
Hi. So I think many of you might be aware that I sent out a letter requesting funding from the governor's budget for the council before COVID, and then again this year. And then I made, some follow-up calls with some of my contacts. And amazed at how very few people really understand what the council is tasked with and the potential and the opportunities that the council represents throughout the state on so many levels. I mean, obviously, when the council was first set up, data was a whole different definition than it is now. And communication, I mean, always reigns true. But I just wanted to say that as, you know, as a chair of the Safe to Drink Work Group, which I realize could be much more active for many reasons, that the opportunity to connect the dots with legislators and their staff is just incredible. And if maybe perhaps to answer some of the ideas that Nick and you guys laid out, maybe it would be a good idea just to think about having like a chair, like all the chairs of the work group to maybe give some kind of summary or request or letter or some kind of package, like yearly, bi-yearly, quarterly, you know, just to kind of keep people up to date. I mean, sometimes we have an ask and sometimes we, as you said, just want to let people know, look at how vital and important and potentially, you know, how all the potentials that can go on. I'm looking forward to seeing Dr. Coffin's, you know, discussion, and it's, you know, it's just it all relates. There's so many dots to connect. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for letting me share.
Thanks, Evelyn. And thank you, Steve, for your comments as well. So yeah, what I'm hearing is, yes, we should convene the subcommittee, and I'll get back to that with volunteers from the council, but of that subcommittee would involve inviting or sending an email out to the co-chairs of the work groups, particularly the active ones, to see if they're interested in participating in the subcommittee and to come thinking about what accomplishments that their work groups have made over the last year or two, and then what follow-on resources or help and asks they would have or request to be elevated to the secretaries, and have that be the basis of the discussion for the subcommittee. And then that, based on the amount of topics there, the subcommittee would then have to, you know, prioritize what topics we would elevate, and then based on what topics are chosen, to then choose the best representatives circled around those topics to attend the briefing as well.
I think that's a great process, Nick. Because we do want a lot of the accomplishments and the asks to bubble up from our committees.
So hearing no other direct feedback, who on the council would like to participate or be invited to that subcommittee?
I can't speak that much and not volunteer, so.
Well, I think you can, it's safe to say that Mark and I need to be on that.
Any others?
Evelyn, would you help us?
Absolutely.
Oh, good, good. I didn't see your hand go up.
I thought this was a council.
I was asking council members, but I assumed Evelyn would participate after I engaged the co-chairs directly. But
oh, okay, thanks.
Well, that's fine if the council entrusts the co-chairs and Steve as the representative for the councils to weigh in and prioritize the recommendations. Then we can certainly do that, and then I will move forward with working with scheduling and then engaging the co-chairs, more importantly, and getting them thinking and making sure they're coming to that meeting of the subcommittee with idea specifics on accomplishments and asks.
In terms of ideal timing for the briefing, I'd say sooner rather than later. I think December, January at the latest would be good. So we should, Mark and I will need to make sure that we get onto the secretary's calendar. Last we briefed them was last December when we were asking for their approval of the revised MOU. And it was a great conversation. So I anticipate a lot of engagement and questions, and you know, the sooner we can get it on their agendas, the better, especially with the holidays and the legislature being not in session at the moment. It's a good time to get on their calendars, I think.
Great. I've seen some messages on, you know, being interested, but not necessarily sure about the commitment. I'm thinking just because of that narrow time window, and I agree with Karen on the timing to do this sooner rather than later. And they generally, even though it is the holidays, this is probably a better time to get them both. I'm envisioning that based on, depending on the feedback I get from the co-chairs, that this would be maybe an hour, 2 hours tops for the subcommittee, and then obviously the 30-minute briefing. So not a huge lift. I mean, there would, again, with the tight window, probably in the next couple of weeks, this would occur, either right before or right before Thanksgiving or right after. This would all be kind of dependent also on, you know, moving forward with finding out what time is even available with the secretaries, and then we can even work backwards from there. But that would be the idea from my perspective.
I think, yeah, getting something on the calendar for the subcommittee quickly, and then Mark and I can simultaneously work on getting it scheduled on the secretary's calendar. So the subcommittee can be working toward it while we're trying to figure out the date. I wouldn't wait for us to have a date before we gather the subcommittee.
Okay.
And I would suggest the more that we can sort of glean from the work groups and have you know, at least a bullet list of items we want to include or you know, discuss, that would make the subcommittee discussion more efficient.
100%. Okay, well, hearing no other direct feedback, I will, I have my clear outline and direction. So if Mark comes on later and wants to fill in some more topics, he can certainly do that. But we're way ahead. We're not too bad. We're ahead of schedule, but this is great. I saw that Scott is on the call, and Scott, are you ready to give your item? I'll relinquish.
All ready to go. Thanks, Nick.
All right.
Alrighty, so next Wednesday at 1 p.m., we're going to be holding a board workshop to discuss our draft sampling and analysis plan for microplastics drinking water. And today I'm going to give you a sneak peek at what we're going to be discussing next Wednesday. So just to get your initial thoughts and feedback and get you primed for the information that we're going to present. So we have a legislative mandate to investigate microplastics in drinking water. Senate Bill 1422 was passed in 2018. Last year, we defined microplastics. And this year, we're required by July 1st to adopt a standardized method for monitoring, accredit laboratories, consider adopting a health-based guidance level to aid consumers in interpreting levels in microplastics, and have a 4-year plan for testing and analysis. COVID got in the way of our timeline a little bit, but we are moving forward to adopt these items early next year. So at this next week's board workshop, I'm going to be discussing these components for July 1st, starting with the standardized method. So the general laboratory process for microplastics analysis is relatively simple. You start with a water sample and you extract it in a laboratory using a vacuum filtration setup. On the filter, you have the particles, and you can take that under a microscope and identify the different particles and categorize them by size, shape, and color. You can take pictures and measurements, and then you need to confirm if it's plastic or not. So this is done through multiple techniques, such as light-based spectroscopy techniques or pyrolysis mass spectrometry. Something important to understand with these light-based spectroscopic techniques is that they're limited on size in terms of the particles that they can detect. Microplastics range from 1 nanometer up to 5 millimeters. And this is as small as a sugar molecule to something as large as a dime or a fish. And with the spectroscopic techniques, we can get about as small as bacteria, about 1 micron or so. Some of these techniques can actually get much smaller, down into the size of like a virus, but below that, you're going to need some different sort of techniques. Oops, there we go. So since there was no standardized methods available when Senate Bill 1422 was passed, we worked with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project to fill this gap, and SQUIRP facilitated an interlaboratory validation study. To do this, they measured blind samples. They sent out blind samples to participating labs. Those labs then measured these samples using standardized protocols for several candidate methods. We quantified the accuracy and precision of these different methods, and also looked at the method capabilities and limitations through different factors. So, for instance, what type of performance do we see from the same laboratory and between laboratories? Does the laboratory experience and training matter? We also quantified the feasibility of each of these methods by asking labs to report the cost and the personnel time required to analyze each sample. We had 26 participating labs from 6 countries with good representation from academia, government, water systems, and industry. We asked laboratories to use one of 5 different methods, including visual microscopy with or without a Nile red dye, infrared spectroscopy and Raman spectroscopy, as well as pyrolysis, gas chromatography with mass spectrometry. Only 2 labs submitted data for the pyrolysis gas chromatography mass spec, so we couldn't do any statistics on that method. We made blind samples for this study to send out to participants, and this included 4 different polymer types that are most commonly found in the environment: polystyrene, polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, and polyethylene terephthalate, in 4 different size fractions, ranging from 1 to 1,000 microns. We also had 4 different shapes, and we included false positives to determine if the laboratories are counting some of these false positives as plastic. This included things like sand, shell fragments, cotton, and notably, this is the only study that has, the only interlaboratory harmonization study that's used false positives. So this is a significant advancement in the field. So I'm going to give you the big picture, and then I'll talk a little bit about the nuances here. So if you starting from left to right, we're looking at the percentage recovery. As close to the dotted line as you can get is an accurate assessment. This is 100% recovery. So overall, we can see that laboratories had lower than expected recovery, but the answer changes when you break it up by size fraction. So looking at the next panel here, you can see that the low recovery was predominantly for these small particles between 1 and 20 microns. Most laboratories simply could not count all of the particles because there were so many and difficult to see with their instrumentation. For the other size fractions, 20 microns and above, we see much closer to accurate results as well as higher precision. We also see some higher than expected recovery for certain colors like blue and clear particles, and lower than expected recovery for orange and white particles. We had some breakout groups meet to discuss potential reasons for these observations. We also saw higher than expected recovery for fragments and lower than, for fibers, and lower than expected recovery for fragments. So here's the big picture of the 3 different methods that we had enough data to provide accuracy and precision counts for. So moving from left to right, we have optical microscopy, infrared spectroscopy, and Raman spectroscopy. Overall, for the accuracy, infrared and Raman are fairly good when you look at the 20 micron and above size particles. They have comparable measurement times, with Raman being a little bit longer than infrared. And I'm sort of skipping over the optical microscopy here because this technique, while it's useful for identifying microplastics, it can't determine unequivocally the chemical ID. So you actually really need infrared or Raman. In terms of cost, infrared and Raman are fairly comparable, with Raman being more expensive on average for both the instrument and the consumables. And really the only strength that we identified for Raman through this study is the ability to quantify smaller particles. Raman can get down to about 2 microns, whereas infrared tops out around 10 microns. So these standardized methods are written up in US EPA format, and they're available on the State Water Board website as of September 28th. So we're encouraging folks to read these and provide comments back to us. We have a public comment period that's open until December 22nd. One of the things that we recognize through this laboratory study is that some of these methods take a long time to run and they can be expensive. There may be some shortcut methods out there that can let us know if there is an indication of a problem, something like a surrogate or screening method. We would use, in an ideal world, we would use these screening methods as a preliminary monitoring technique, above which a certain threshold, then we'd want to send those samples for additional analysis using something like a bulk quantification method using pyrolysis GCMS, and then use these Raman and infrared methods. Since we don't have these screening methods available, we're going to start by using the infrared and Raman for our initial monitoring campaign and validate some of these screening methods as we go. We also recognize through this effort that the exchange of information as part of our working groups was really valuable for a lot of people. And we wanted these conversations to continue. So we started the California Microplastics Monitoring Subcommittee of the Trash Monitoring Work Group. This is part of the Water Quality Monitoring Council. So we're meeting on a regular basis, and this is a local and global community exchange of information and data for microplastics monitoring methods and tools. Our first goal is to develop a playbook, all of the pro tips and information that anyone would need to do monitoring for microplastics. We can also use this forum to discuss these techniques that I discussed today, develop our surrogate monitoring techniques, and assist laboratories in getting accredited for monitoring. On the subject of accreditation, we had a breakout group that developed the steps to accreditation through this working group. Our Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, or ELAP, has all of the components that we need for accrediting laboratories right now. This includes inspection checklists, documentation, the type of performance evaluation samples that we'd want, as well as quality criteria for assessing labs. And one of the things to note here is that for the method study, we couldn't just buy a performance evaluation sample from a supplier. No one in the world is making these commercially. And we worked with a group out of Norway to develop these samples specifically for this project. They're custom made. Going forward, we anticipate that there will be companies that step up and start making the performance evaluation samples that we want to adequately assess laboratory performance. But we don't need those right now in order to accredit laboratories for these methods. ELAP does not need performance evaluation samples to provide accreditation, and they do it for without these for other methods. We do have some things that can be used by labs in lieu of having a performance evaluation sample of our desires. So there's 2 things on the street right now. The National Institute of Standard and Technology has polymer kit that has 22 plastic materials typically found in the environment, is easily obtained in an affordable kit. They also have traceable size standards that have different sizes of polystyrene spheres that laboratories can add to their samples to determine the recovery. So we have ways of assessing laboratory performance, but we don't have the perfect sample that we want. So another requirement of Senate Bill 1422 is to consider adopting a health-based guidance level. When we monitor for microplastics in source water and drinking water, consumers are going to receive that information on their annual consumer confidence reports. And they're going to be wondering, what does this mean for our health? So to fill this data gap of not knowing exactly what the health effects are, we held a health effects workshop that was, again, facilitated by SWIRP. And this included experts from around the world to assess the evidence for impacts to humans through drinking water, as well as the aquatic ecosystem. This was a year-long effort that involved a rigorous data analysis process. We asked our experts to let us know what level of evidence is available for deriving a health-based guidance level for drinking water. The State Water Board has multiple health-based guidance levels for emerging contaminants, such as notification levels and response levels. And the group said that there's just not enough evidence right now to develop a notification level. We should really stick with qualitative health-based guidance for consumers, and we can develop a non-regulatory screening level that's used more as a scientific aid, as opposed to something that we would want to communicate to labs or to consumers, or require water systems to do if they exceed. So we identified three main classes of problems that prevented us from developing a notification level, and this includes an inadequate effects database. Most of the studies are not doing a good job characterizing the particles, and they're mostly using polystyrene spheres. We don't understand the effect mechanisms for the effects that we're seeing in these studies, which is necessary to extrapolate to diverse particle types within the microplastics group. We also have incomplete exposure data. We don't know what's in our food, and no one has done any harmonized monitoring for drinking water. Through our campaign, our sampling and analysis campaign, we can actually fill this data gap by doing the first ever harmonized assessment of microplastics in drinking water. So all of this research that we've been conducting leads up to the 4 years of testing and analysis. This all informs our plan for moving forward to test in drinking water. Something that is important to understand when considering where and when we want to test and how we want to use these methods is that most drinking water treatment plants employ a filtration-based treatment technology. Flocculation and sedimentation is very commonly used for treatment plants that have surface water as their source water. This can remove particles as small as the single micron range, about the size of bacteria. There's other techniques that are being used, like microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis, that can remove smaller and smaller particles. As I mentioned earlier, Raman and infrared, they can get down to, theoretically, the single micron range, but with our current method evaluation study, we feel confident that labs can get down to 20 microns. So this is not to say that there are that we can't use these methods. It's just to say that if we were to use these methods on treated drinking water, we might not find the microplastics that are actually there. They're too small to be detected using these current methods. So with that in mind, we are recommending that the State Water Board use a two-phase approach for monitoring microplastics in drinking water. In the first phase, we would only be looking at source waters. So again, we can't see the particles that are breaking through the treatment, so we can only really look at the source waters. This would mostly be surface waters, as we don't think that groundwater really contains many microplastics. We'd also be focusing on the biggest water sources, what's actually serving the majority of the people in California. So this would be water producers that produce more than 10,000 million gallons per year, or water systems that serve more than 10,000 people. We would be requiring labs to at least report the 20 microns and above microplastics. If they can get us the smaller particles, then we would accept that data, but it won't be required. And along the way, we'd like to validate some easy surrogate methods that water systems are already using, such as turbidity. There'll be a 6-month gap between this first phase and the second phase. And in this gap, The State Water Board will assess the data that we get from the first phase and come up with a plan for what we want to do in the second phase. If we don't find any microplastics in surface waters, great. We probably won't do any more monitoring, or it'll be very, very limited. But if we are finding widespread contamination, especially with certain areas, we're going to want to investigate those areas further. And by this time, we're hoping that performance evaluation sample providers are making these things commercially available. This is really important to be able to determine the reliability of these methods down to smaller particles. So we know that some labs can get much smaller microplastics using these methods. Some labs can actually get down well into the nano range. But in order to assess their performance, we need these performance evaluation samples. So in phase 2, we're going to be looking again at source waters, but hoping to be able to look at the treated drinking water with these lower detection limit methods. We may be looking at additional water systems, or we may be narrowing our scope and only looking at a few water systems that we know have contamination. And if we have these surrogate methods available, the tier monitoring surrogate methods, we would be trying these out on a more widespread basis. For all of these phases, we'll be using the ASTM D8333220 sampling protocol. This is a very simple standardized protocol for sampling water for microplastics analysis. It's as simple as shown here. You have an adjustable flow control sampling tap. You connect a stainless steel tubing and a flow meter to it, followed by an adjustable flow control valve. And then you want to bring 1,500 liters through a set of filter sieves. You rinse off the filter sieves and bring them to your lab, and then you do the analysis. It's fairly straightforward for drinking water. This method technically can be used for wastewater and waters of higher turbidity, but it's certainly a lot more challenging to do for wastewater than it is for drinking water. Drinking water has much fewer particles in general, so we're hoping that this will be quite relatively easy for this campaign. So the next steps, we have our draft policy handbook online. It was just published today online, so if you want to go onto our website and check it out, we have a comment period that is open until December 22nd. We're also conducting external scientific peer review on all of the components I mentioned today. And we'll be holding a board adoption hearing on February 22nd of next year to consider adopting this policy handbook. I mentioned before, we have the monitoring subcommittee. This is an ongoing effort that's open to all. And starting in spring of next year, we'll be training ELAP and third-party assessors through SQUIRP. And by summer of next year, we hope to have a laboratory accreditation available for these two methods. So I'd like to entertain questions and get some feedback.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Evelyn, I see your hand is up.
Boy, I have a big mouth, don't I? Scott, I have a question. You said that there's no health recommendation from microplastic effects. Is that, I'm just wondering if the health community is adequately engaged in this conversation, or is it because there's really no evidence, which I find kind of hard to believe. So I'm just wondering where it rests. You know, does the health community need to be much more engaged in this conversation than they are?
Short answer is yes. We definitely need more engagement and more research money towards doing these laboratory studies. We found 30 studies that were applicable for microplastics for mammals, and the majority of those studies were relatively poor quality. We consider these to be preliminary studies that are reporting some effects in rodents, fairly consistent effects for male reproductive impacts, but not at the level of quality that we would want to really be able to assess risks to humans. So based on that, we are recommending some qualitative health-based guidance language, but in no way are we ready to quantitatively assess risks.
Has there been a broad appeal to the health communities, like maybe research institutes or places that might not have initially been involved in drinking water, but now that this is sort of a new field of study, or it is a new field of study? where they might be, willing and able?
I'm sure that a lot of people are really aware of it because there's a huge international global push to increase awareness for microplastics, but more awareness is encouraged. In the US, we actually looked at who's getting funded to do this sort of research, and there's only one project that's being funded right now. It's in Arizona, and it's a pilot project. It's a very, very small project. Most of the research, if not all, is currently happening in Asia and Europe. So the US could definitely do more in this realm.
I mean, I don't read JAMA every week, but JAMA, should publish some kind of letter or, appeal so that physicians are aware that this is an emerging field and that, we really need information, because we're putting people at risk if they're not given the correct information, and then they're still going to go to bottled water, which we know is not any safer.
Yeah, so we want to make sure we get that messaging very clear. Bottled water is almost certainly going to be more contaminated with microplastics than tap water. So we don't want people to switch to bottled water because they have detectable levels in their tap water.
So I hope that there's language that is given to water utilities, because there's going to be a cut and paste situation going on like throughout the country. So I hope that language is really like thoughtful, which I know it will be. I'm not saying it won't be. I'm just praying that it will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Oh, Krista, sorry.
Hey, Scott, nice to see you.
You too.
I had a question. So early on in your slides where you're showing the percent recovery, and you had over 100% for certain categories of colors. Can you explain that?
Sure. So that's due to background contamination, as well as identifying positive controls, false positives as plastics.
But yeah, also the background. I was wondering.
But also backgrounds, especially for fibers. That's user clothing, shedding onto onto their microscopes and onto the samples, and that's something that we came up with some guidance for to reduce the background contamination. Really, you just want a good filtration system, like a HEPA filter in your lab, as well as a strict clothing policy. So some laboratories wear like orange jumpsuits so that when they see an orange fiber, they know that it's from them.
Thank you.
Grant.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Scott. So you indicated that microplastics in groundwater was not a concern. Is that simply because you're not finding microplastics in groundwater, or there are no pathways for microplastics to enter in the groundwater system?
There's been limited studies on this. Those that are looking at groundwater for indirect potable reuse, so like rapid recharge systems with sand filtration, they're actually finding microplastics getting through. But for most groundwater wells, just like a typical groundwater well that's you're not pumping water into, they're not finding anything at all. Very, very low levels.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarification. So for indirect, potable reuse, where there's input of treated wastewater effluent or potentially stormwater into the groundwater, there is potential for microplastics to enter into the groundwater through that method.
There is, and a lot of these indirect potable reuse systems in California are using reverse osmosis. So they're going to remove those microplastics. Mm-hmm. But for de facto reuse, where they're not doing RO, you might find some from the infiltration.
Thank you.
I guess we'll find that out next year with Steve's study. I'm thinking you don't need to go all the way to RO to get there. My own bet, Scott, is that anything above just regular tertiary filtration treatment will probably get you there, but we'll see.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. My understanding, I was at actually one of the seminars at SQUIRP, and they were saying they were finding microplastics in DI water, and so RO is going to remove a lot of the plastics, but apparently it's a really intense effort to get everything out of there. Is that accurate?
Maybe Steve can speak to that a little more. I don't know the exact details on that.
Yeah, I don't remember that statement, Ray, but I think it's probably associated with background contamination. And we had to invest in our laboratory a couple $100,000 to redo the air filtration system because the background contamination is just so high that we had to put in a HEPA filtration for the entire room. We also had to create a positive pressure laboratory so that the air can't just get sucked in from the outside. Once we did that, we were able to cut our background contamination by over 99%.
Okay, and I may have misspoke. Now that I think of it, I think it was DI water. They were talking about finding it even in their lab water, so that may not be as intense as RO.
Well, great. Thanks, Scott. Any other comments for Scott? I really wanted to bring him in because I thought the workshop that was held at SQUIRP was really great. And while the findings may have not have been satisfying to some, I thought that the recommendations on what the needs were for monitoring in the future were key. And that was where this group could play a real important role. And I was really excited to see that the trash line work group has kicked off a microplastic subcommittee and is going to be working on the key products that Scott outlined below. And that's going to lead into some of the what Shelley Moore is going to speak on next. Before we move on, let me go ahead and Brian, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I can take this offline too with Scott. I just had on the recommendations just along the sample collection and analysis. The protocol is going to include specific QC samples. I don't know if you could give, especially both field generated and lab initiated, and like what you see as the most important, of the QC samples to track, whether it's contamination based or any other sort of biases.
Absolutely. So the methods that we developed, they are largely based on the US EPA methods that have a lot of different quality control requirements for blanks, laboratory blanks, field blanks, and both of those are going to be really important. If you're using this ASTM method, there is a way to do it where you actually never have any exposure to air, and it virtually eliminates the need for a field blank. You get very, very low, if zero contamination using that technique. But in the laboratory, you're always going to need a blank. And that one is going to be very important to assess your own contamination.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for the question. There's also been some action in the chat with some links from Shelley Walther and others on the ASTM method. Thanks again, Scott. I will take over.
Thanks, Nick.
And I do encourage you all to check out the Microplastics Health Effects Workshop webpage and the recordings there. It was a really great workshop. On to item 9. I saw Shelley Moore was available. Are you around, Shelley?
I am.
Great. I will stop sharing and you could take over if you'd like.
Awesome. All right. And thank you for the invite.
Before you get started, I think it might be on purpose, but your camera is blocked.
Gotcha.
There you go.
Sorry about that. All right. So I wanted to give you an update on the trash monitoring work group and what we've been working on, as well as introduce you to the Microplastics Subcommittee that we've just created. You can see from here that we have a number of subcommittees under the work group, and you can see each one of the leaders. There's been a lot of changeover over the last year and a half as far as people participating in the work group, and many of our co-chairs have changed positions. You can see from the encampments group, we have Sarah Hutmacher from San Diego River Park Foundation, Caitlin Kalua, who has recently moved to the Ocean Protection Council, Tony Hale with SFEI, Wynn Calgar with the Moore Institute, and we've lost our co-chairs for the Citizen Science Group. Those were Sherry Lippiett, formerly with NOAA, and also Aaron Hyman with Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. I would hate to see this group go away. I'm looking for replacements for chair on the Citizen Science Group, and have been in talks with Aaron's replacement at the Delta Conservancy about taking over this group. So we're looking for volunteers, and we're going to get this group moving on and going forward. So that's right now what our group consists of. We had a trash monitoring work group meeting on November 1st. And it was unanimously voted in that we would have a microplastics subcommittee added to the work group. And I'll give you more information on that in just a little bit. I wanted to let you know about our November 1st meeting. We had some really great speakers. And if you have an opportunity to, there's a link at the bottom of this presentation that I can also share other places. We had a Google Litter team talking about their machine learning and the tool that they're building that will really, I think, change things for trash monitoring on streets in California. They're doing it throughout the US, and basically taking the imagery that they collect while they drive their little car around with the camera on top. And they do that pretty regularly. So they've developed a machine learning algorithm for identifying trash, and it's looking really good. So they presented to us. The other people who presented, Scott gave an awesome presentation on microplastics, and Diego Sancho Gallegos from the Save the Waves Foundation talked about a mobile app that they've created to enable surfers and other concerned citizens to enter information about any problems they see at the beach. But I really want to highlight a talk given by Megan Walsh. She's with San Diego State University. And I had initially asked her to talk not about trash, but around issues surrounding unhoused people. And she gave a talk basically giving us their perspective. And I would highly recommend watching the video if you want a different perspective on unhoused folks. It starts at about an hour and 11 minutes in. So again, a really great meeting. Just to remind people what some of the goals for our work group and subcommittees have been, you can read the list here, but essentially it's to get people together to communicate about what everybody's working on, looking for potential opportunities to collaborate and work together, and talk about what other people in the US and the world are doing. So it's a really great group, and there's been a lot of great work that's been done so far. And we haven't had a lot of meetings over this last year, but I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you about the trash monitoring webinar series. The trash monitoring work group did sponsor that series, and many of the people in the work group did participate in this. And it was basically, I think it was a 10-month series of talks about trash, and we had a different person talking every month. Now this is a list of the topics that were covered. And we had a great 3-hour meeting on September 30th, specific to microplastics monitoring. All of these have been recorded and are available to view via the YouTube channel for the water quality monitoring group. So please feel free to watch those and let us know if you have any questions. So finally, I wanted to let you know that we did officially create the Microplastics Subcommittee. This is a doodle poll where I would encourage you to go there and fill out your availability as we look to set the first official Microplastics Subcommittee meeting sometime in early December. So Scott and I have been communicating and I know Scott has some interest in serving as chair of this subcommittee. We were trying to identify some of the goals that we would discuss at the first meeting. And this is a list of those. And again, we want to really focus on looking for areas of collaboration and potential funding opportunities for people to work on microplastics. There's been some talk of developing a playbook similar to that developed for monitoring methods around larger trash. And discussion of all the different methods that have been going on. And what I'm looking for from you guys are any other ideas that you may have for setting goals for this group moving forward. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, please contact myself or Scott, and I'll leave it to you if you guys have any questions or comments.
Thanks, Shelley. There was a request if you could in the chat put a link to the doodle poll for that that initial meeting or the next meeting.
Sure.
Microplastics.
So Nick, maybe I'll get the discussion started.
Great.
I serve as the liaison to that committee, and they have been fantastic. The dialogue that's been going on, the community they are creating is exactly what we as a council want to see happen. So congratulations on doing that. I think with the microplastics, there's a tremendous opportunity there. The thing that I think is really the opportunity, and I think Shelley kind of opened up the door to this playbook idea. One of the things that's happening in that field is the methods are evolving rapidly, and even the needs, the decision points for how that information is going to be used are changing rapidly. Developing a playbook that identifies the options and the limits of those options and how the options fit together, I think would be a wonderful tasking of that committee. So I think, Shelley, really the key is you've got so much on that plate that narrowing it down and having one or two that rises above the other that you can really work towards a product would be really a wonderful thing to do. And maybe over time, this council can give you even more guidance. I'm thinking in particular, Mark Gold, I see that you've joined us. Mark is developing a strategy right now, which some of the things you talked about will probably fall in. There's a wonderful opportunity to use the council as a way of developing consensus around some of the things that he's going to want to develop over time. But the structure you've set up and the attendance that you have and the dialogue you have is wonderful.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Any other feedback on the goals that they've outlined? I mean, I think they're a great set of goals. I didn't have anything to add, but I would, in addition to feedback on those goals and maybe the top ones, is to help. Yeah, it's help lead the group. I think it's great that Scott has shown willingness, but he is, spread thin as well. So if there are other experts within the microplastics realm that you all are working with in your sectors, that I encourage you all to spread the word on the work group, but also to encourage them to help lead the group as well.
Great, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate it. And she did drop the bit.ly link in there for the doodle poll for the meeting coming up, so please share that. And there's also the recording. I've added the link there, and if you need it, I can send it. But before we get to item 10, I wanted to give a chance for our co-chair, Mark Gold, who was able to join us, to maybe circle back a little bit on the item of related to the agency secretary briefings. He had some unique ideas that I wanted him to share his idea, and hope maybe in an effort to get you some of the other members thinking about potential ideas and maybe to entice others to participate.
All right, thanks, Nick. And I just want to apologize for missing this. I blame Steve Weisberg because he got me on the surf panel that ended up taking about an hour and a half, 2 hours or so. So anyways, interesting to be with all the feds, but here I am. So I really regret missing that item the most, because one of the things I just wanted to sort of throw at you as an idea is that to really get the attention of the secretaries, realizing the discussion we've had many times on that monitoring just doesn't get adequate funding in a budget world where everything's based on one-time funding. And this has been a huge problem, and we've all talked about it. And so, you can get programs started but not maintained because of lack of funding. But the need for long-term funding has never been more apparent, especially with some of the things we're seeing with climate impacts. And so one of the things that we were all talking about, Karen, Nick, and I, in just sort of an idea to maybe catalyze things, is that perhaps the OPC can invest in the development, not the implementation, the development of a model coast and ocean monitoring program for the state of California, to really put something on the table to really be discussed is sort of a first step in really getting water quality monitoring and just monitoring as a whole going better in the state than it has been. And so that's something that I'm thinking about. I think it's something I've thought about really since I started at the OPC, but I think it was probably magnified a great deal going through the process of creating a funding effort for monitoring of ocean acidification and hypoxia for the state, and something that we just invested about $1.6 million in. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. And coast and ocean monitoring is probably the area that I know better than some of the other areas that might be of much greater concern to many people on this committee. But really look at it as a possibility to really, get people to think bigger on the importance of monitoring for the state. I mean, look at what we just talked about on microplastics. There's no microplastics monitoring program. We're talking about new methods. Who's walking around with an IR in their lab? Not too many folks, right? And so it's that sort of thing. We've seen the same sort of thing happen on microbial pollution for many years, and talking about PCR methods, et cetera, and that who has money for that, who's really monitoring for those on a regular basis. So anyway, so that's the thought, is that it seems like I look at obviously what SCORP's leadership has been on the Southern California Bight, and that's sort of demonstrated what can be done, and they've been doing that, I think, for 30 years or something at this point. But there's much of the state that's really not very well monitored at all along the coast and ocean. So I'll stop there and be glad to entertain any thoughts or opinions on this, but because it really is just a concept at this point. Ringing silence. That means everyone either hates it or loves it, or is completely indifferent.
I'll go with loves. I think you're absolutely right, Mark.
Well, and it's right in line with what we said we wanted to do when we had the discussion earlier during the agenda, which is to highlight briefly accomplishments and then what are our next steps and where do we want to go, and supporting the OPC in developing a program would be right in line with what I think this council does and is good at, and expand on what, Squirt does in the bite is a good, hook. So I think we can flesh it out in the subcommittee that Nick is going to convene of the council, and go from there.
And to put thanks, Karen, and to put people's mind at ease, it's not that I'm thinking a subcommittee is going to create the monitoring program. There will be, a team, a multidisciplinary team pulled together to do this. And I think many of you have probably been involved in such things. If you're involved in national estuary programs or the like, or just working with SQUIRP with their bite-wide studies, et cetera. These are definitely multi-stakeholder decisions, but you definitely want someone who's living and breathing it and is on the hook for creating the work product. So that will happen. All right, that was it. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Mark. And I will say that, that example is a direct, in line with our original legislative tasks under 1070. And, we're supposed to identify those gaps and then not only identify them, but provide recommendations on how to help fill those. And, we can provide, in this case, a clear example of a success in the bite, but also how to expand it and to have multiple agency buy-in would be great. So with that, on to item 10. And so this is on to 2022 and scheduling. So I did send out I did preemptive meeting holds to you all to just hold those dates of assuming that we kept a similar schedule, which is the second Thursday of February, May, August, and November, the quarterly framework. I wanted just to field feedback. Would those dates work for you all? Do we need to make adjustments? And we should do that sooner rather than later, because I know people's, and I know at least my schedule is filling up already. So I sent those out and find the exact dates.
So Nick, the second Thursdays of those months tend to coincide with a review body that we have here at SQUIRP when they're meeting.
Okay.
So I'd rather, if you want to pick a regular thing, I'd rather aim for maybe the third Thursday, or alternatively, we can just find alternative dates. But 3 of the 4 of those dates, I have a conflict. Terry Fleming would have a conflict as well, since he serves on that.
I think Coastal Commission's actually then too, by the way, Nick. And I'm a commissioner.
Well, there you go. So the second Thursday it does not work. That's great. What about who is speaking before that?
Oh, I just have a similar thing. I have monitoring weeks on the second week of every month. I could also do the third week as well as Steve.
Okay, does the third week work for the majority of you? So I switched it to.
It's a CASA regulatory work group meeting, so it takes out a lot of the POTW community. Is there a reason that Thursday's the best day?
It's just classically been the best day in the past, but we don't. It doesn't have to be a Thursday. It just happened to work out this go around.
Fourth Thursdays are great.
So the 4th Thursdays work for the majority of folks. So I'm looking at February 24th, May 26th.
Yeah, except for the Thanksgiving Day is the 4th Thursday of
Well, we can adjust for that. So yeah, August 25th, then make an adjustment for November to maybe do December 1st instead.
All of those days work for me.
Me too.
I'm free.
All right, well, I will do that then.
And thank you for getting those holds on the calendar, because there are sort of standing items that I can delegate to others, and the sooner I know, the better. So that's great.
I will send an adjusted calendar as soon as we sign off the firm dates. Well, thank you for that. That was relatively painless. And then I have some potential topics that I've outlined for the first meeting, which should be February 24th. Hearing update from the Safety E group on their realignment, which is in line with some of the Jedi topics we heard about. The environmental flows work group has been creating a work plan. They finished their environmental flows framework, or at least the first majority of the plan. So they're looking at what to do next as a work group. It's been a really great work group to watch operate as well. I've been in touch with Josh Steele and Steve about maybe that being an opportunity for the wastewater-based surveillance subcommittee to give an update. And also the wetland work group at their last meeting is looking at how they're going to move forward. Looks like Josh Collins is retiring, so looking to fill that void, and then just they're kind of looking at what their future is and trying to. They have a plan in place to try to work with leveraging the EPA work plans and utilizing the work group to kind of hit many birds with one stone. So they're wanting to get council feedback before getting too far. So those are just some ideas. I'm open to others. You can voice them now or reach out to me if there's a couple of these that sound more attractive than others, assuming that this first meeting at least will still be remote. We didn't want to jam too many things in at once.
Nick, that's a good list. I'm going to add one more. I'm just looking at my calendar. It's happenstance, but we have now scheduled our meeting in February for the day after. Mark is theoretically presenting a microplastics management strategy for the ocean to this council. I'm guessing that part of that will include a direction for developing a monitoring program for microplastics. It might be good to have Mark give us a small presentation on that and how he would like to task the council or the committee, the new microplastics subcommittee to support that.
Okay, so noted.
I can't believe you're giving your board members homework. I thought that was like totally taboo.
No, I'm giving the chair of this committee homework.
Oh, okay. Even worse. No, that makes sense.
Any others?
Hey, Nick, I just had what I mentioned earlier, potentially talking about AB 1066 and kind of what the plan is and what our obligations as members are on council members on that. And then I was also interested in what Karen brought up originally, potentially talking about some of the 303D impairment process. I know, yeah, what she mentioned ahead of time, like being on schedule and all that. I think a report out on that overall process would be interesting too. And those could just be director's reports kind of things too, I suppose.
Sure, the AB 1066, I will provide an update, assuming there's something that we can share. The 303D, I'll ping. That might be a longer item. That would be maybe better for May, but I think it's a good topic. Thanks, Brian. And if any others pop into you guys' head in the next quarter, just please reach out to me as always. And with that, I want to thank you all for a great meeting and welcome the new members, and excited to move forward with the agency briefings and into the new year. So everybody have a great holiday season, and I hope to be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you all.